Somewhere around the year 2000, millions of CueCat scanners were pushed into American households, free, unsolicited, sealed in a blister pack with a coiled cable and a setup leaflet. They arrived tucked inside magazine subscription mailers, dropped into direct mail promotions, and handed out free through retailers like RadioShack. The device was called CueCat. Its purpose was printed right on the cardboard backing. Scan a barcode from a magazine page, and a web browser would open to the matching destination. Paper becomes clickable. The promise fit on a single line. The reality did not. For decades, barcodes had operated as invisible infrastructure. A laser at a checkout counter reads a printed code in milliseconds. A scanner on a warehouse shelf logs inventory without asking anyone to think. The entire system was built around speed and automation, machines reading printed lines so humans did not have to. CueCat took that same technology and reversed the relationship. It handed the scanner to a consumer sitting at a home desk and asked them to do the reading, the waiting, and the interpreting themselves. That was the gamble, that people would willingly perform a task every other barcode system had been designed to eliminate. The scanner itself was a curved plastic shell, small enough to sit beside a keyboard on a home desk. It connected to a home computer through a wired pass-through or USB connection, depending on the version, with a cable that threaded between the keyboard and the machine. Before a single magazine barcode could be read, the device needed software, registration, and a working connection. That sequence of install, register, connect, configure was the hidden cost behind the glossy promotional insert. The setup tax came before the first useful scan, and this is where the object becomes a system. CueCat was never a standalone gadget. It was the visible piece of a much larger demand, a device, a software layer, a routing mechanism, and a destination page all had to work together before anything useful happened. The cat-shaped scanner sat on the desk. The invisible part was the ritual behind it. Keep the scanner plugged in, keep the software running, keep a magazine open beside the CRT monitor, hold the device steady over a printed barcode strip, wait for the dial-up connection to go through, and hope the destination loaded something worth the effort. Each step carried a small friction cost, and small frictions compound. A cable draped across a desk gets unplugged to make room. A driver conflicts with another program. A dial-up connection ties up the household phone line for 30 seconds to load a single page. One evening, the scanner gets moved to a drawer to clear space near the keyboard and mouse. None of that is dramatic. All of it is corrosive. A default behavior forms when the cost of participation drops with repeated use. CueCat's cost stayed flat or rose every single session. Distribution was enormous. Digital Convergence, the company behind CueCat, arranged partnerships with major publishers and electronics chains. Scanners shipped inside magazine polybags, arrived in catalog mailers, and sat in bins at RadioShack counters across the country. Contemporary reporting placed millions of units in circulation by late 2000, with hundreds of thousands reportedly in active use and plans to distribute millions more. By the measure of physical reach, the device was everywhere. By the measure of habitual use, it was almost nowhere. A scanner sealed in a blister pack dropped into a subscription mailer is an object in a household. It is not a behavior. The gap between owning a device and using it daily is the gap between distribution and default adoption. And CueCat fell squarely into that divide. Reaching millions of desks should have been enough, except the people funding the system wanted something very different from the people expected to use it. Publishers and advertisers paid for CueCat because it promised measurable reader engagement. A scanned barcode could be logged, time-stamped, and tied to a specific print campaign. RadioShack even published catalogs with CueCat readable barcodes beside product listings. That data gave advertisers a metric they had never reliably had: proof that a reader interacted with a printed ad. The business model pointed toward the advertiser's desk, where campaign sheets and response analytics lived. It did not point toward the consumer's desk, where a plastic scanner competed for space with a monitor and a stack of unopened mail. The people paying for the system wanted measurement. The people expected to use the system wanted convenience. Those two goals never resolved into a single, frictionless workflow, and the mismatch ran deeper than inconvenience. Trust operated as another adoption cost. Each CueCat device transmitted a unique serial number with every scan, and registration required personal details, zip code, email address, and demographic information. As privacy groups and technology coverage focused on the device identifier and the data it collected, some users began to treat the scanner with open suspicion. Reports of exposed registration data compounded the unease. Fine print terms on the setup leaflet and warranty card described data practices that felt opaque. The trust question added one more friction cost: hesitation at the moment the system most needed confidence. The deeper problem was coordination, something no single fix could have solved. Barcodes worked everywhere else because the systems around them were purpose-built, with dedicated scanners, trained operators, closed networks, and predictable environments. CueCat grafted the same encoding technology onto a context where nothing was purpose-built, and everything depended on a consumer volunteering effort. Publishers had to print proprietary barcodes in their ad layouts, formatted to a specification most editorial teams had never handled. Consumers had to install unfamiliar software on a home computer and keep a wired peripheral connected beside the keyboard. The computer had to be powered on and online at the moment of scanning, and the destination, the web page waiting at the end of the barcode, had to deliver something rewarding enough to justify every preceding step. If any single layer broke or disappointed, the entire chain collapsed. Most chains broke early. Digital Convergence burned through its funding. The scanners accumulated in junk drawers, donation bins, and landfill piles. Some hobbyists stripped out the proprietary encoding to repurpose the hardware as a generic barcode reader, a minor second life that said more about tinkering culture than about the original product's viability. The original routing infrastructure disappeared, and by the end of 2001, the scanner's original consumer workflow no longer produced results. The magazine barcodes became inert printed shapes, unreadable without servers that no longer existed. The idea, though, did not disappear. It resurfaced in a form that honored the principle CueCat had violated. When smartphones made camera-based code scanning ordinary, QR codes became a lightweight print-to-web bridge. No peripheral to install, no driver disk, no cable, no dedicated software. Just a camera application, already present on a device already in a pocket. The critical difference was where the effort lived. The phone's camera collapsed the setup friction. Scanning a code became a gesture that cost almost nothing, and the destination loaded on the same screen in the same hand. The system shrank until the user barely noticed it operating. CueCat is worth studying as an interface case, not recalling as a punchline. It mapped a real impulse, the desire to move from a printed page to a digital destination, onto a system that made the user bear the heaviest burden. It proved that distributing millions of devices is a logistics achievement, and that logistics achievements do not, on their own, create default behaviors. A system becomes default when the effort required drops as adoption rises. CueCat demanded effort first and promised value later, and almost no interface survives that sequence for long. An interface fails when it asks people to do more work than the old one, or than doing nothing at all.